This video will cover section 1.4, the square root property. So we've already discussed solving quadratic equations using the zero factor property, where we factor. The square root property works when you have a quadratic equation where there is just an x squared, there's no x term. So if I have x squared equals some number, then I can say the answer is x equals the square root of that number, or x equals the opposite of the square root of that number. Alright, and so that is to say the solution of x squared equals some number is the square root of k and the opposite of the square root of k. And the fastest way to write it, or an abbreviated way to write it, is plus or minus the square root of k. Now, until we know more about what this equation goes with, what problem or why we're solving this equation, we can't know if we can pick negative or positive, which it should be. So until then, you just write plus or minus. Okay, so let's look at some examples. If I have x squared equals 25, notice there is no x term. I just have the x squared and the constant. The way that I can solve it is to take the square root, because remember we're trying to get x by itself. So I take the square root, that will undo the exponent 2. And then I'm going to do plus or minus the square root of 25. So the square root of x squared is just x. And then the square root of 25 will be plus or minus 5. Now, if you're unfamiliar with square roots, you may want to go by the Learning Lab and get some help on simplifying, or come by my office and we can discuss square roots and radicals. Alright, for the next problem, problem B, we have negative, or the opposite of x squared, equals negative 144. Alright, so what I want to do is make my x squared positive, so I'm going to divide both sides by negative 1 to get x squared equals 144. Now that my x squared is positive, I can take the square root of both sides. Alright, and that'll tell me that x equals plus or minus 12. And then you can use the calculator also to take the square root. So if you're using the TI-84 that's in the classroom, you would hit the second button, that's that blue button, and then you would hit the x squared button, and then that would lead you to the square root sign, where you can then type in the number that goes under. Alright, for the last one, we have the square root of x equals 19, so I'm going to take, that's not right, x squared equals 19, so I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And this would say x equals, now if you type in the square root of 19 into your calculator, alright, and this is just a basic calculator, if I want to take the square root and get it typed in right, the square root of 19, if I type that into my calculator, notice it gives me a long decimal. Well, we don't want to write our answers in decimal form, so I would just write plus or minus the square root of 19. Now, if I can simplify this 19 in any way, I'm going to do that. For example, if I had the square root of 48, I would take the square root of both sides, alright, to get plus or minus the square root of 48. And so then when I took the square root of 48, notice I get a decimal. Okay, but if I look at the factors of 48, 1 times 48, 2 times 24, 3 times 16, 4 times 12, and 6 times 8. If I look at those factors, if any of them are perfect squares, then I can simplify 48. And so I see 2 that are perfect squares, meaning I can say something times itself and get the number. So 4 is 2 times 2, and 16 is 4 times 4, so we would say 4 and 16 are perfect squares. Now what I want to do is pick the largest one, so that I only have to do one step in simplifying, and that would be 16. So I could actually write 48 as 16 times 3. And then the square root of 16 is 4. And then the square root of 3 stays under. So this would be the simplified version. We don't want decimals, remember. We always want it written in simplified fraction or radical form. So if you need help on simplifying these square roots, then either come see me or go to the Learning Lab to get some help with that.